During a basketball match, my son splashed beer in my face and sneered, "You've achieved nothing in life." The giant screen replayed it for everyone to see, and the crowd roared with laughter. But then, several players on the bench froze, pointing toward me. One shouted, "That's Rafael Cruz! He's a legend!" My son's smug grin collapsed into shock as whispers of recognition spread through the arena. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. The vacuum hummed softly as I guided it across the rug, the sound almost like a meditation. Saturday mornings were mine, simple, peaceful, untouched by the noise of the outside world. No meetings, no rushing, no demands. Just me, the hum of the machine, and the home I had built with my own hands. I paused near the old recliner, the one my late wife Sophia had picked out decades ago. The leather had grown worn, but I never replaced it. It wasn't just a chair. It was a reminder of the life we once shared, the laughter of our family, the place where my son once curled up to watch cartoons before he grew into someone I barely recognized. The peace broke when I heard it, the deep growl of an expensive engine pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to look. My chest tightened instantly. Only one person came here unannounced these days, my son, Daniel. The front door swung open without a knock, just like always. He strolled in wearing designer sneakers that had never touched dirt, a tailored shirt that probably cost more than my week's groceries, and sunglasses pushed casually onto his head. He didn't even greet me. His first words cut like glass. "Dad, why are you still doing this? Couldn't you at least hire someone to clean this place?" I switched off the vacuum, and the sudden silence made his words echo louder than they should have. He walked across the live-in room like a stranger visiting a place beneath him, his eyes scanning the furniture as if calculating its worth. He sat down in my reading chair without asking, crossing one leg over the other with the arrogance of a man appraising property he didn't want. "I like keeping things in order with my own hands," I said quietly, coiling the vacuum cord. My voice was steady, but inside I felt the sting. He glanced around again, his lip curling. "This isn't order. This is retirement. A small house, old furniture, library books stacked like trophies no one cares about. You've completely given up." His words hit harder than he realized. For a second, I saw not the man before me, but the boy who used to help me sweep the driveway on weekends, who used to laugh when soap bubbles spilled from the bucket as we washed the car together. That boy would have been proud of the order in this house, but the man sitting in my chair looked at it like evidence of failure. I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. "I worked for 40 years, Daniel. I earned the right to live quietly." But I could already see it in his eyes, the disdain, the distance, the anger building, and I knew this morning would not stay peaceful for long. Daniel leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, his expression sharp and restless. "Quietly?" he scoffed, shaking his head. "That's the problem, Dad. You've settled. You've accepted being ordinary. Look around. This house, these books, this life. Is this what you're proud of? Because it looks like giving up." His words stung in places I didn't even know were raw. I had built this home board by board, paid off every inch of it with long nights and aching bones. This living room had seen birthdays, Christmas mornings, family dinners filled with laughter. To me, it wasn't giving up. It was proof I had lived. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "What's wrong with living quietly? I worked for decades. I paid for your education, your business loans. I gave you opportunities I never had. That's not giving up, son. That's providing." But he laughed, the sound hollow and humorless. "Providing? No, Dad. You threw money at me because you had nothing else to offer. No network, no influence, no example of real success. You taught me how to be satisfied with scraps when I should have been aiming for more." I stared at him, my hands tightening around the vacuum handle I hadn't yet put away. "Scraps?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "I worked 3 jobs so you could study at one of the best universities in the country. I emptied my savings so you could open your first office when no one else believed in you. Don't you dare call those scraps." His eyes flickered with irritation, but he pressed on, circling me like a wolf testing its prey. "You gave me money, Dad, sure, but money isn't everything. You didn't give me vision. You didn't give me ambition. You didn't give me anything to look up to. I had to become who I am by fighting past your small dreams." For a moment, I saw the little boy who once ran into my arms after scoring his first basket at school, his face glowing with pride. That boy had looked up to me like I was his hero. But the man standing before me now looked at me like I was the anchor that held him back. I set the vacuum down, slowly, deliberately. My pulse hammered in my temples, but my voice stayed calm. Daniel, you want to know what ambition is? It's sacrificing your youth so your child can have a future. It's swallowing your pride and working night shifts so there's food on the table. That's ambition. That's success. He shook his head, lips curling into a smirk that cut deeper than any blade. No, Dad, that's survival, and survival is what nobody settle for. His words struck like hammers, each one heavier than the last. Survival is what nobody settle for. They echoed in the quiet of my own living room, a space I had fought to keep sacred, and suddenly every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture Sophia had once chosen, seemed smaller under his judgment. I took a step closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. Do you have any idea what it cost me to give you everything? I missed birthdays because I was working night shifts. I broke my back on construction sites so you could sit in lecture halls. I went without, over and over, so you never had to. And now you stand here telling me it was worthless. Daniel crossed his arms, his tone sharp, almost surgical. Yes, because none of it mattered. You never taught me how to be somebody. You were too busy pretending ordinary was enough. The words felt like a slap. For years I had carried guilt about not being able to give him the luxuries his classmates had growing up. But I thought he understood. I thought he knew my sacrifices were love written in sweat and exhaustion. Now hearing him dismiss it as nothing, it hollowed me out. I steadied myself, refusing to let him see me break. You think this house, these books, this life mean I'm a nobody? I raised a man who owns a business, who drives cars I'll never afford, who wears shirts worth more than my week's groceries. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from me, from what I gave you. For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw something soften in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. His jaw tightened, his voice sharp as glass. No, Dad, I built myself despite you, not because of you. You don't inspire me, you shame me. The silence after those words was heavier than the air in the room. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath coming in sharp bursts. For years I had let him speak down to me, excused his arrogance as the confidence of youth. But this was different. This was cruelty. Enough, I said, my voice lower now, steadier. If you can't respect me, you don't belong in this house. Get out. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh, as if I had made a joke. But when he saw my face, saw that I meant every word, his smile vanished. Fine, he snapped, snatching his jacket from the chair. If you want to waste your life in this cage, do it alone. The front door slammed behind him so hard the picture frames rattled. The house fell silent again. But it was not the peaceful silence of a Saturday morning. It was the silence of something breaking that might never be put back together. The silence lingered long after Daniel's car peeled out of the driveway, leaving the faint smell of burnt rubber behind. I sat in my chair, staring at the door he had slammed, my chest heavy, my hands trembling. I had thrown my only son out of the house. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man I had sacrificed everything for, had walked away calling me a nobody. And yet, beneath the pain, there was something else, a quiet certainty that I had finally drawn a line that should have been drawn years ago. By the next morning, the certainty felt fragile. The ache of losing him gnawed at me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house seemed haunted by echoes of his childhood. The worn carpet where he took his first steps, the chipped kitchen table where he used to do his homework, the back door he once ran through shouting he'd made the basketball team. Memories pressed against me until I felt I couldn't breathe. That's when I knew I needed Hector. The diner sat on the corner of Lincoln Avenue, its neon sign buzzing the same way it had for 30 years. Hector and I had been coming here since our 20s, when we were both just kids chasing paychecks and football dreams. Even after life pulled us in different directions, the diner became our anchor. Once a month we sat at the same booth, drank the same coffee, shared the same kind of truths only old friends can handle. Hector was already there when I arrived, his broad frame hunched over a chipped mug, his salt and pepper beard catching the morning light. He looked up as I slid into the booth, and his face changed instantly from casual to concerned. "You look like hell, Rafa. What happened?" I told him everything, the vacuum, the insults, the rage in Daniel's eyes, and the words that had gutted me. I repeated them slowly, as if saying them aloud might make them less sharp. "You shame me." By the time I finished, Hector's jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Listen to me," he said finally, his voice low but firm. Kids talk foolish when they're angry, but what he said to you, that wasn't foolishness. That was cruelty, and cruelty doesn't get rewarded, not even from your own blood." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I threw him out, Hector. Told him he wasn't welcome until he learned respect. Was I wrong?" Hector shook his head slowly. "No, a father doesn't have to accept being spat on by his own son. Respect comes first, always." For the first time since Daniel had walked out, I felt a little steadier. The weight didn't vanish, but Hector's words gave me something solid to lean on. The days that followed crawled by like years. Each morning I woke up with the same instinct, to reach for the phone, to call Daniel, to apologize even when I knew I'd done nothing wrong. But Hector's words echoed in my mind like a shield. Respect comes first, always. So I resisted. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, stared at the phone, and let the silence test me. The house felt heavier without him, though he hadn't lived there for years. His absence now was different, louder, crueler, like a door slammed shut between us. I walked through each room as though expecting to find a piece of him left behind, some trace of the boy who once ran barefoot down the hall laughing, but all I found were echoes. In the evenings, I tried to busy myself in the garden. Spring was pushing its way into the soil, and the earth begged for attention. I planted rows of marigolds along the back fence, their fiery colors catching the sunlight like little bursts of defiance against the quiet of the house. I worked until my back ached and my hands were black with dirt, the physical labor calming the storm inside me. Still, every time I stood up to stretch, I caught myself glancing toward the back gate, half expecting him to come through it the way he used to as a teenager, grinning sheepishly after breaking curfew. But the gate stayed closed. One night, I sat with Sophia's old letters. I had kept them in a wooden box at the top of the closet, tucked away for moments like this, moments when I needed her wisdom more than anything. Her handwriting flowed across the pages, loops and curls that carried her voice back to me. One letter in particular stopped me cold. Daniel had been 12 at the time, stubborn, testing every rule we laid down. "My darling Rafa," she had written, "I know you worry about being too strict, but remember, we are not raising a child. We are raising a future man. If we don't teach him respect now, the world will teach him much harsher lessons later. Trust yourself. You're a better father than you believe." I read it 3 times, her words sinking into me like medicine. Love without boundaries, she was telling me, wasn't love at all. It was enabling. That night, as I placed the letter back into the box, I whispered into the stillness, "I'm trying, Sophia. I'm trying to do what you would have done." The waiting hurt, the silence cut, but somewhere deep down, I knew Hector was right. Sophia was right. Daniel had to learn respect on his own. And until he did, my phone would stay untouched. 2 weeks passed, each day dragging its heels like it wanted to punish me. Morning after morning I poured my coffee, stared at the phone, and argued with myself. My finger hovered over Daniel's number more times than I could count. A simple call could end the silence, but every time I heard Hector's voice, firm, immovable, "Respect comes first," and then I saw Sophia's words on the page, reminding me that we were not raising a child, but a man. Those words anchored me even as loneliness tried to pull me under. The house had grown unbearably quiet. I used to enjoy silence. It was the gift of retirement, the peace I had earned after decades of labor. But now it felt like a sentence. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator reminded me I was alone, and yet I knew the silence was necessary. It was a test for both of us. The garden became my salvation. I spent hours kneeling in the soil, coaxing life from the earth, letting the sun beat down on my shoulders. I planted tomatoes, peppers, and a row of sunflowers that stretched proudly toward the sky. Each seedling felt like a promise that time and patience could yield something beautiful. But when dusk fell and the shadows stretched across the yard, I felt the ache of absence again. I would catch myself looking toward the gate, waiting for a familiar figure that never came. Neighbors stopped by now and then. Mrs. Alvarez from Netzeb. XT Door brought a basket of lemons from her tree, her eyes soft with unspoken sympathy. "Your son doing well?" she asked gently. I forced a smile and gave the only answer I could. "He's finding his way." It was easier than admitting I hadn't heard from him in 14 days. At night I sat in my reading chair with one of Sophia's photographs resting on my lap. I spoke to her in whispers, asking questions the silence never answered. Did I fail him? Was I too hard? Too soft? The photo never responded, but her eyes, frozen in that eternal smile, seemed to remind me of her faith in me. On the 14th night I held her letter again. I traced each word with my finger. The ink faded but still strong, her message clearer than my doubts. Trust yourself. You're a better father than you believe. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair. The ache of missing Daniel hadn't lessened, but something inside me shifted. I realized I wasn't just waiting for him. I was teaching him, even now, in silence. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest but most necessary lesson of all. On the 15th evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the doorbell rang. My heart jolted in my chest. Nobody rang my doorbell at that hour. I wiped my hands on a towel, hesitating before I reached the door. Through the peephole, I saw him, Daniel, standing on the porch, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved into his pockets. The arrogance that usually clung to him like cologne was gone. He looked smaller somehow. I opened the door cautiously. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, they didn't carry disdain. "Dad," he said quietly, almost stumbling over the word, "can we talk?" I stepped aside, allowing him in. He paused at the threshold like he was waiting for permission, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. Inside, he glanced around the living room, the same room where he'd torn me apart 2 weeks earlier. But this time, he didn't criticize. He just stood there, shifting his weight, awkward and unsure. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice strained. "I said things, cruel things I shouldn't have. I called you worthless, ordinary. But none of that's true. I was angry, Dad, angry about other things, and I took it out on you." His words hit me harder than the insults ever had. I gripped the back of my chair to steady myself. For 2 weeks I had waited, prayed for this moment. Now here it was, and it felt both fragile and overwhelming. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Daniel continued, his hands clasped in front of him. "But I want to make it right. I want us to have something again. I don't want to keep being this stranger in your life." I swallowed hard, my voice breaking when I finally spoke. "Son, those words you said, they cut deep, deeper than you'll ever know." "I know," he said quickly, stepping closer, "and I hate myself for saying them, but I need to show you I mean this. I want to spend time with you again, real time." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 glossy tickets. "There's a game this weekend, courtside seats. I thought maybe we could go together, like old times." I took the tickets in my trembling hands. They weren't cheap, I knew that much, but more than the money, the gesture spoke volumes. He was investing in us again. I looked at him, searching his face for any trace of deceit, but all I saw was remorse, and maybe hope. "I'd love to go," I said softly. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled at me, and it wasn't arrogant, it was real. That night, long after Daniel had left, I sat in my chair staring at the tickets on the coffee table. The glossy paper shimmered under the lamp, as if holding more than just admission to a game. It felt like a fragile bridge, a chance to rebuild something I thought was lost forever. My hands shook when I picked them up. For 2 weeks I had prayed for this moment, and now that it had come, I wasn't sure if I could trust it. I needed Hector's voice. The next morning, I drove down to the diner on Lincoln Avenue. The neon sign buzzed like always, the smell of bacon and coffee spilling out as I stepped inside. Hector was at our usual booth, his large frame hunched comfortably, a newspaper folded beside his plate. He looked up when I slid into the seat across from him. His sharp eyes studied my face instantly. "Well?" he asked. "What's happened?" I laid the tickets on the table between us. His eyebrows shot up. "Basketball." "Daniel came by last night," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "He apologized, Hector. Really apologized. Said he wanted to make things right. Gave me these." Hector leaned back, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Sounds promising. How did he look?" "Different," I admitted. "Not arrogant, not dismissive. He looked humbled." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "He called himself a fool, said I wasn't a failure. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my son again." Hector reached for his mug, taking a long sip before answering. "That's good, but don't let the apology blind you. Words are easy, Rafa. Actions prove the truth. Let him show you this isn't just a performance." I nodded, clutching the tickets. "I know, but still." It felt different. It felt real. His gaze softened, his tone gentler, and maybe it was. Maybe he's finally realizing what matters. But remember what we talked about. You don't bend your spine to disrespect, not even when you're desperate to heal. Hold your ground. If his apology is genuine, he'll respect you more for it. I leaned back in the booth, letting his words sink in. The fear that had clung to me for 2 weeks began to loosen its grip. Maybe Hector was right. Maybe waiting hadn't been in vain. When I left the diner, the morning felt brighter, the weight on my shoulders lighter. I clutched the tickets in my hand like proof that bridges could be rebuilt, that suns could return, and that sometimes, even after the deepest wounds, there was still hope for healing. Sunday came faster than I expected. For 3 nights I had barely slept, waking up every hour to check the tickets on my dresser, as if they might vanish. The morning air carried a nervous energy, the kind I hadn't felt in years. I ironed a clean shirt, pulled on my best pair of jeans, and found the old jacket Sophia had on. She bought me. Standing in front of the mirror, I almost felt younger, as though this day wasn't just about basketball, but about something greater, a chance at reconciliation. Right on time, Daniel's car purred into the driveway. Not the old rusted vehicles he once borrowed from me in college, but a sleek black luxury sedan that glistened under the California sun. He stepped out dressed casually but expensively, his smile wide and, for once, unforced. "Looking good, Dad," he said as I locked the front door behind me. The drive to the arena stretched across nearly an hour of traffic, but the ride didn't feel tense like it used to. Daniel talked about work, carefully avoiding the darker details, focusing instead on the parts that sounded promising. I shared little pieces of neighborhood gossip, updates about Mrs. Alvarez and her lemon tree, stories about the garden. Small things, but comfortable. For the first time in a long while, the conversation didn't feel like walking through a minefield. And then, the stadium appeared, rising from the landscape like some futuristic temple, all glass and steel, shimmering under the afternoon sun. I had seen it on television, but nothing compared to standing beneath its massive frame. The scale of it, the way it seemed to hum with energy even before the game had started, left me speechless. Daniel glanced at me, clearly pleased. "Impressive, isn't it? They spent billions building this place. State-of-the-art everything. Even the seats have charging ports." We moved through the crowds, a sea of jerseys and painted faces, the smell of popcorn and hot dogs mixing with the sharp scent of concrete and metal. Families bustled, friends shouted predictions, children waved foam fingers larger than their heads. It was chaos, but it was joyful chaos. Security ushered us through quickly with our VIP passes, and suddenly we were inside, surrounded by wide concourses and glowing screens broadcasting highlights. It felt like stepping into another world. I followed Daniel through the maze until we reached our section. Row 12. Courtside enough to see the sweat on the players' faces, but high enough to watch the game unfold like a chessboard. I sank into the cushioned seat, letting out a slow breath as I took it all in. Daniel handed me a cold drink, his smile softer now. "Glad you came, Dad." I turned to him, my chest tightening with something that felt dangerously close to joy. "So am I, son. So am I." The stadium buzzed with energy as players jogged out for their warm-ups, sneakers squeaking against the polished court, music pulsing through the speakers. The crowd roared, waves of cheers rolling like thunder. I leaned back in my seat, soaking it all in, the kind of atmosphere that could make even the oldest man feel young again. Daniel leaned closer, his voice just loud enough to rise above the music. "Do you remember when you first taught me to dribble?" His smile held a faint trace of nostalgia, something I hadn't seen in years. "Backyard, cracked driveway. That old ball you said had more patches than leather. I couldn't keep the thing bouncing straight, but you made me keep trying." I chuckled softly, the memory tugging at me. "You were 8 years old, every times. The ball slipped away. You chased it like it was the championship, tongue sticking out, sweat pouring down your little forehead. I told you to keep your hand soft, guide it, don't slap it. And when you finally dribbled 10 times in a row, you looked at me like you'd conquered the world." His grin widened, but it carried a flicker of sadness, too. "I remember. You always had a way of explaining things that made sense, not just how to play, but why it mattered. You used to say the ball listens if you respect it. I thought you were crazy at the time." "That's because you were stubborn," I said, nudging him with my elbow. "Still are." For a moment it was easy, too easy. The noise of the stadium faded as I was pulled back into those sunlit afternoons in the yard, Sophia watching from the porch, her laughter mingling with ours, Daniel's small hands gripping the ball, his face lighting up each time he improved. Those were the days when he looked at me like I was invincible, the boy who once believed in me without hesitation. He turned back toward the court, his eyes following the players as they practiced jump shots. Funny thing, Dad. I think I learned more from those afternoons with you than I ever did from coaches. You taught me patience, discipline, even if I didn't realize it back then. The words surprised me. For years I'd convinced myself he had forgotten, that all my lessons had been buried under layers of ambition and arrogance. Hearing him say it now sparked something fragile in my chest. I placed my hand on my drink, steadying the tremor in my fingers. I'm glad you remember, son. Some lessons are worth more than the trophies. And for a fleeting moment, I dared to believe we were finding our way back. The game tipped off with the kind of electricity that only live sports can deliver. The ball soared into the air, the crowd roared, and bodies collided as if the court were a battlefield. I let myself get lost in it, clapping when our team sank an early three-pointer, cheering when a steal turned into a fast break. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt light. Beside me, Daniel cheered too, but there was something off in his rhythm. His eyes kept darting, not just to the game, but to his phone, to the exits, to the ground at his feet. His hand twisted his cup nervously, crushing the thin plastic until it squeaked. I leaned toward him. You okay? Yeah, he said quickly, his voice too sharp. Then, softer, almost drowned by the noise of the arena, Dad, I need to talk to you. Something important. The words pierced through the noise around us. I glanced at him, his face pale under the bright lights. Now, in the middle of the game? He nodded, his jaw tight. I can't wait any more. Before I could protest, he leaned closer, his words hot in my ear despite the roar of the crowd. I need your help. Financial help. The stadium seemed to blur around me. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out. I blinked at him, trying to process. How much? 60,000, he said without hesitation. His eyes searched mine desperately, as if the number alone might shatter everything between us. My business is collapsing. I've tried to hold it high now. I held it together. But the market's shifted, and I'm leveraged too much. If I don't get cash fast, I lose everything. 60,000. The number slammed into me like a fist. My pension, my savings, my careful years of scraping and surviving, they weren't even close to that. My throat went dry. Daniel, I don't have that kind of money. His head jerked back like I'd struck him. What do you mean you don't have it? You worked your whole life. Construction, side jobs, overtime. You must have something. I shook my head slowly, forcing the words out. I gave what I had to you already. Your tuition, your first office, your start. Everything I saved went into you. I don't have 60,000 lying around. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around his cup until it buckled. So what then? You're just going to let me drown? Family is supposed to help family. Around us, the crowd erupted as another shot dropped through the hoop, but I barely heard it. My son's voice, angry, desperate, was louder than everything else. The cheers of the crowd faded into a dull roar as I stared at him. My son, the boy I had once cradled in my arms, the man I had emptied my savings for, was now looking at me like I was nothing more than an ATM refusing to dispense cash. Daniel, I said slowly, carefully, if I had it, I would give it to you. You know that. But I don't. I live on a fixed income. I pay my bills. I keep this house. I survive. 60,000 isn't just out of reach. It's impossible. He shook his head violently, disbelief flashing across his face. Impossible? No. You're lying. You have to be. You worked for decades. You can't tell me you've got nothing left to show for it. His words dug into me like claws. I clenched my fists in my lap, fighting the urge to shout back. Everything I had, I poured into you. Your education, your business, the opportunities you wanted but couldn't reach alone. I signed loans when no one else trusted you. I sacrificed so much so you could become who you are. His eyes narrowed, his voice sharp as a blade. No, Dad, you sacrificed because you had nothing else. You didn't give me opportunities. You gave me guilt payments. And now, when it matters, when I need real help, you hide behind excuses. I felt my pulse hammering against my temples. His words weren't just desperate. They were cruel, twisted to make me question my very worth as a father. But I held steady. I'm not hiding, Daniel. I'm telling you the truth. I don't have what you're asking for. And even if I did, respect doesn't come with a price tag. For a moment his face flickered, torn between anger and panic. Then the anger won. He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. So that's it? You're just going to let me lose everything? After all these years, after everything I've done to rise above the pathetic life you chose, you can't even save your own son? The words hit like a knife. My chest tightened, but my voice didn't waver. I can't give what I don't have, and I won't let you buy respect with money. If you think I'm pathetic because I worked, sacrificed, and lived honestly, then maybe you've forgotten what it means to be a man. His hand trembled around his crushed cup, his jaw tightening as though he was barely holding himself together. The crowd around us cheered another basket, oblivious to the storm brewing in row 12. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The tension between us had been building like a storm cloud, heavy and dark, ready to burst. I could see it in the way Daniel's jaw clenched, in the way his hand gripped the flimsy cup until cracks spread along the plastic. His eyes darted around, catching the sight of other families laughing together, fathers and sons high-fiving after each basket. And then, like something inside him snapped, he shot to his feet. I can't stand this anymore. His voice rang out, sharp enough to make heads turn. You sit there pretending to be wise, pretending to be strong, when really you're just a selfish, pathetic failure. The crowd closest to us went silent, conversations dying mid-sentence. I froze, my stomach twisting. Daniel, sit down, I whispered, but my words didn't reach him. His anger was louder than reason. Before I could react, he lifted his cup high and with one furious motion flung the beer straight into my face. The cold liquid splashed down my cheeks, soaked through my shirt, dripped from my chin onto the cushioned seat. Gasps rippled through the section as strangers leaned forward, eyes wide. You've achieved nothing in your life, he bellowed, his words echoing through the arena like a curse. Nothing! You're a worthless old man who can't even help his own son. I sat there, dripping, stunned, my breath caught in my throat. The cameras roaming the crowd for reactions during a timeout had landed on us at the worst possible moment. My face, wet with beer, filled the jumbotron above the court. The laughter started in pockets. Snickers, then chuckles, then roars of amusement as the crowd realized what they were watching, a father being humiliated by his own son. Daniel, fueled by the attention, doubled down. He gestured wildly at me, his voice carrying over the jeers. Look at him, living in a tiny house, clinging to a pathetic pension, acting like he's done something with his life. This is what failure looks like. Phones rose into the air, recording. People pointed, laughed, shouted cruel comments I couldn't even process. My humiliation was no longer private. It was entertainment. The stadium thundered with mockery, and I sat frozen, soaked and trembling. The son I had sacrificed everything for standing above me, tearing me apart for thousands to see. For a heartbeat, I thought I would break. But then, in the corner of my vision, I noticed movement on the bench. Players, coaches, even referees had stopped to watch the screen. Their expressions weren't amused, they were stunned. Some of them whispered, pointing at me, recognition dawning in their eyes. And in that instant, I knew the tide was about to turn. The laughter echoed like thunder, wave after wave crashing against me, drowning out the pounding of my own heart. I sat motionless, soaked and trembling, my shirt clinging to my chest, beer dripping down onto the polished floor. Every drop that slid from my chin felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of my dignity. Around me, strangers grinned, Point, Ted, and lifted their phones, eager to capture a father's humiliation, as if it were just another form of halftime entertainment. I tried to wipe my face with shaking hands, but the sticky liquid clung stubbornly. My son stood towering over me, his face twisted in fury, his voice sharp and merciless. "Do you see it now?" he shouted, feeding on the crowd's energy. "This is what a wasted life looks like. This is what happens when you aim for nothing." The words sliced through me deeper than the laughter ever could. My throat burned, my chest ached, but I couldn't find the strength to answer. What was there to say? To thousands of eyes, I was just a pathetic old man, drenched and defeated, unable to fight back against his own blood. A group of young fans a few rows down started clapping in rhythm, mocking the moment, chanting, "Failure! Failure!" Their voices rose, others joining until it felt like the entire section was a chorus dedicated to my downfall. My ears rang with it, my vision blurred, not from tears alone, but from the unbearable weight of being stripped bare in front of so many. I lowered my gaze, staring at the floor beneath me. I thought of Sophia, of the promises we had made to raise a son who would carry respect in his heart. I thought of the nights I worked until my hands bled. of the sacrifices that had stolen years from me but given him everything. And now, here I was, repaid with scorn, displayed like a fool for the amusement of strangers. The arena lights felt hotter, harsher, exposing every wrinkle on my face, every drop of beer glistening like proof of my worthlessness. My hands trembled in my lap, and for the first time in decades I felt small, invisible. But then, through the roar of laughter, I caught it, a murmur, not from the crowd, but from the court below. Players had gathered near the sideline, their eyes fixed not on the game, but on me. I saw one of them point, whisper to another, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. The chant above me grew louder, crueler, but down on the hardwood something else was building, something I hadn't expected. Down on the sideline, the murmur grew louder. I saw one of the guards elbow his teammate, pointing directly at the jumbotron, where my dripping face filled the screen. Another player leaned forward, squinting as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Then came the words, faint at first, but distinct enough to reach me through the chaos. "That's Rafael Cruz. No way. That's him." The name rippled through the bench like a spark across dry grass. Heads turned, eyes widened. A rookie forward grabbed his phone, scrolling furiously, then held it out to his teammates. I could see their expressions shift from confusion to astonishment, from disbelief to reverence. Meanwhile, above me, the chants of failure still rang out, cruel and mocking. Daniel fed on it, gesturing at me wildly. "You see, even they agree. You're nothing, Dad. Nothing." He had no idea what was happening just a few feet away on the court. Then, in a movement that silenced entire sections at once, Jamal Hayes, the team's young star, a name every fan in that arena knew, rose from the bench. He grabbed a microphone from a sideline staffer and jogged toward our section. The cameras followed him, confusion flashing across the jumbotron as the crowd shifted from laughter to stunned curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamal's voice boomed through the arena, cutting the noise in half. "May I have your attention for a moment?" The laughter died instantly. 70,000 people froze, staring first at him, then at the screen above where my image still lingered. Jamal pointed directly toward me. "That man up there, the one being disrespected by his own son, that is Rafael Cruz." He paused, letting the name sink in. NBA legend, 3-time champion, Hall of Fame, one of the greatest point guards to ever touch this game. Gasps spread through the crowd, sweeping from one section to another like a wave. Phones that had been recording mockery now zoomed in with reverence. Murmurs turned to shouts. "No way. That's really him? I watched him when I was a kid." Daniel's face drained of color. His triumphant grin crumbled into disbelief. He turned to me, eyes wide, his lips parting like he wanted to deny it, but the voices from the court left no room. Terrell Brooks, the team's veteran captain, took the microphone next. "I grew up studying his tapes. The man threw more assists than most players could dream of. He led 3 different teams to championships. You've been laughing at a legend." The stadium, which just moments before had been a chorus of cruelty, now shifted into something else entirely. Respect, awe, even shame. The weight of humiliation that had crushed me began to lift, replaced by the stunned silence of recognition. The microphone began its journey up through the crowd, passed hand to hand, each person eager to touch the object that would carry my voice. I hesitated when it reached me, the weight of it both familiar and foreign. Years ago, I had held microphones after victories, after trophies were raised high. Now, I held one soaked in beer, my dignity hanging by a thread. I rose slowly to my feet. The stadium, which had been a wall of laughter moments earlier, fell silent. 70,000 pairs of eyes fixed on me, waiting. Daniel stared at me in disbelief, frozen in the seat beside mine, as though the ground had shifted beneath him. I lifted the microphone to my lips. My voice came out steady, stronger than I expected. "Yes," I said, the single word echoing across the arena. "I am Rafael Cruz. I played 12 seasons in the NBA, 3 championships, Hall of Fame." A ripple of applause surged, but I raised my hand for quiet. But that's not the story that matters. What matters is why I walked away. I retired when I still had years left in me, because a doctor told me that if I pushed harder, I might never walk again. I chose to leave the game so I could walk my son to school. I chose family over fame. The crowd leaned in, the energy shifting again, not just awe, but something deeper, respect, curiosity, reverence. I glanced down at Daniel, who sat frozen, his face pale. "My son didn't know who I was," I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. "And that was by choice. I never told him about the championships, the records, the glory. I wanted him to see me as a father, not a headline. I wanted him to understand that a man's worth isn't measured in money or fame, but in love, in sacrifice, in respect. The words hung heavy in the air. Even the players on the court had stopped moving, their eyes locked on me as though I were giving a final play in a huddle. I worked jobs. Most people overlook, I said, my voice growing firmer. I built houses, carried bricks, painted walls, not because I had to prove myself, but because I wanted my son to have every opportunity I never had. That is what success looks like. Not applause, not headlines, but raising someone you love and giving them a future. The arena erupted in thunderous applause, the sound shaking the very rafters. My hands trembled as I lowered the microphone, my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a failure, not as a retiree, but as the man I truly was. For a long moment, the roar of applause filled every corner of the stadium. I stood there gripping the microphone, my chest rising and falling as if I had just finished the hardest game of my life. The cheers rolled over me, drowning out the sticky discomfort of beer on my skin, washing away the sting of humiliation. Beside me, Daniel sat like stone. His earlier confidence had drained from him completely. He stared at me as if I were a stranger. No, worse, as if I were a man he was only just meeting for the first time. His lips parted, but no words came out. His hands trembled where they rested on his knees. Finally, he pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff, unsteady. The crowd noticed, the massive screen catching his pale face, the wetness in his eyes. He leaned toward me, his voice cracking so badly the microphones on the court barely picked it up. "Dad, forgive me, please." A hush spread like a blanket over the arena. The same strangers who had laughed at me minutes before now held their breath, waiting. Daniel swallowed hard, his face crumpling as he forced the words out. I didn't know. I didn't know what you gave up. I didn't know who you really were. I was blind, arrogant, cruel, and His voice broke, tears streaking down his cheeks. I called you worthless when you were the greatest man I'll ever know. My throat closed, emotion swelling so strong I thought I couldn't breathe. The crowd murmured, some people clapping softly, others wiping at their eyes. On the court, players nodded with solemn respect, as though they too understood the weight of the moment. I lowered the microphone and reached out, placing my hand on Daniel's shoulder. His body shook under my touch, not with defiance, but with the collapse of pride he had carried for too long. He bent forward, his forehead pressing against my chest, like he had done when he was a boy seeking comfort. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, his words muffled by sobs. "I'm so sorry." I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tightly despite the sticky beer still clinging to me. "You're my son," I said softly into his hair, "and I will never stop being your father. But respect, Daniel, respect must live between us, or we have nothing." The crowd erupted again, not in laughter, but in thunderous applause, this time for a different kind of victory, one that had nothing to do with championships, and everything to do with love. The applause thundered on, rolling through the arena like waves against a shore. For the first time in years, I felt Daniel soften in my arms, not the arrogant man who had once looked down on me, but the boy I had raised, the boy who once believed I could fix anything just by being there. When we finally pulled apart, his face was streaked with tears, his eyes red but clear, clearer than I'd seen them in a long time. He looked at me, voice trembling but sincere. "Dad, how do I make this right? After everything I said, everything I did, how do I fix it?" I squeezed his shoulder, grounding him, making sure my words cut through the noise around us. "You start by remembering this moment. You start by never again confusing money with respect, or net worth with self-worth. I gave you everything I could, Daniel, not just money, my time, my sweat, my love. That is the wealth that matters." He nodded quickly, like a man clinging to a lifeline. "I understand now, I swear I do. I thought success was about climbing higher, owning more, proving I was better than everyone else. But I see it now. I was wrong. You were the example all along. I was just too blind to see it." I could hear murmurs around us, people whispering, phones still recording. Some fans shouted encouragement. Others simply applauded, moved by a story they had never expected to witness. The game itself had become background noise. For a few minutes, the entire arena seemed to revolve around us, a father and a son trying to stitch back together what pride and cruelty had torn apart. Daniel wiped at his face, straightening himself. "I don't care if the business fails. I don't care if I lose the car, the office, any of it. What I can't lose is this." He gestured between us, his voice breaking again. "My father. I should have realized it sooner. I felt a tightness in my chest, not from pain but from something else, relief. A heavy weight that had been pressing down on me for years was finally lifting. "We can rebuild," I told him, my words firm. "Not your business, not your bank account, us, our bond, that's what matters." Daniel nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Then let's rebuild, Dad. I'll earn your respect the way I should have years ago. No shortcuts, no arrogance, just truth." The applause rose again, and though the scoreboard still ticked on, the only victory that mattered had already been won. When the game finally resumed, neither of us paid much attention to it. The players ran, the crowd cheered, the scoreboard changed, but for Daniel and me, the real battle had already ended. We sat side by side in those expensive seats, no longer enemies, but father and son, beginning again on new ground. I could feel the difference in him, his shoulders less rigid, his eyes softer, his voice no longer sharp with arrogance. For the first time in years, I felt that my son was truly present with me. As we walked out of the arena later, the night air cool against our faces, Daniel slowed his steps. He looked back at the glowing lights of the stadium, then at me. "I'm proud to be your son," he said quietly, almost reverently. I should have said that years ago. I should have lived like I believed it. I stopped and studied him, seeing not the man who had humiliated me, not the boy who had shouted cruel words in my living room, but my child, the one Sophia and I had raised with love and discipline, the one we had poured every ounce of ourselves into. "Now you know," I said gently. "That's what matters." We stood there for a moment, the silence between us no longer heavy, but healing. The wounds weren't gone, but they had started to close, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. When I returned home, the house felt different, not empty, not cold, but lighter, as if the air itself had shifted. The chair where I usually sat no longer seemed like a prison of loneliness. It was simply a chair again, a place to rest. The photographs on the side table looked brighter, as though Sophia herself had witnessed what had happened, smiling from somewhere beyond. I picked up the tickets from the coffee table, running my thumb across the glossy paper. They had been meant as a peace offering, but they had become so much more. They were a symbol of what had been broken and what could be rebuilt. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something I had nearly forgotten. Respect is not given because of wealth, or trophies, or fame. Respect is earned through sacrifice, through love, through choosing family even when the world doesn't notice. I had lived my life quietly, honestly, and with purpose. If that made me ordinary, then ordinary was enough. And to anyone listening now, I'll leave you with this. Never confuse someone's silence with weakness, and never mistake simplicity for failure. Behind every quiet father, every modest man, there might be a story of sacrifice greater than you can imagine. If you found meaning in this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments what lesson it left you with.